Anybody here? Hello?
A massive spaceship called the Avalon glides silently through space on a 120-year journey to Homestead 2, a distant colony planet. With 5,000 passengers and 258 crew members in hibernation, the ship runs on autopilot, its quarters cold and empty. Everything changes when the Avalon enters an asteroid field. The shields begin to weaken. Power is rerouted to protect critical systems, but it is too late. A massive asteroid strikes the hull, triggering a cascade of system failures. Automated repairs start immediately, but one error slips through. A single hibernation pod malfunctions and opens. Inside is Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. Disoriented and confused, Jim is guided through the standard wake-up process and told he is just 4 months away from Homestead 2. He receives an ID band, is shown his personal cabin, and briefed on how to enjoy the ship's amenities before arrival. Still adjusting, Jim heads out and stumbles into a welcome class meant for a group of new arrivals. However, he is alone. The cheerful hologram lectures about Earth's problems like overcrowding, high costs, dwindling opportunities. It urges Jim to save questions for the end, but he interrupts, asking why he is the only one there. The hologram cannot answer, so Jim sets out to find someone, anyone. He makes his way to the ship's grand concourse, but it is empty. An automated info desk offers assistance and directs him to a steward. There is no luck. He then tries to find the captain, but the bridge is locked and all crew members remain asleep. He was never supposed to be one of the awake ones. Not yet. He was just one of the passengers. At the observatory, Jim confirms the ship is still 90 years from Homestead 2. He has woken nearly a century too early. Panicked, he rushes to send a message to Earth. The system calculates a 55-year delay for a reply.
Earliest reply in 55 years.
55 years.
Defeated, Jim wanders into the ship's bar, where he finally sees another person. But the bartender, Arthur, turns out to be an android. Jim tries to make sense of it all, asking how this could happen. But Arthur offers no answers, only drinks and friendly conversation. The next day, Jim searches for food and finds that most of the menu is reserved for gold-class passengers. He drinks a bland coffee, then tries to fix his hibernation pod using the ship's tools. He lies inside and waits, but nothing happens. He tries again, attempting to access the crew's sleeping quarters. Still nothing. Meanwhile, the ship begins experiencing small malfunctions. Frustrated and alone, Jim returns to Arthur for company. Eventually, Arthur suggests Jim break into a gold-class suite and make the most of his stay. Jim follows the advice. He eats at the finest restaurants, plays games, and explores every bit of luxury the ship offers, but the loneliness does not fade. The longer he stays awake, the more unbearable the isolation becomes. One night, drunk and wandering aimlessly, Jim stumbles into the hibernation bay and discovers the airlock chamber where spacewalk suits are stored. Without hesitation, he suits up, steps into the airlock, and opens the outer door. Drifting outside, he is overwhelmed by the silence and vastness of space. He is completely alone, the only conscious person alive on the ship. He releases the magnetic locks on his boots and floats freely, lost in the emptiness. After returning to the ship and removing the suit, Jim walks back to the airlock, this time without protection. He pulls the lever, ready to end everything, but at the last second he panics, bolts for the inner door, and slips on a bottle. As he regains his balance, he notices a sleeping woman in a pod. Her name is Aurora. Curious, he looks her up in the passenger database and begins watching her video interviews. Soon, he becomes fixated. Day after day, he visits her pod, listening to her voice and reading her writings. Back at the bar, Jim discusses Aurora's work with Arthur. He is captivated by her thoughts and the tragic irony of it all. He left Earth for a better life, only to wake up early and be stranded. Now, he has found a perfect woman, but she is out of reach. Unable to shake the idea, Jim starts contemplating waking her up. He shares his dilemma with Arthur, but the android does not grasp the weight of it. Jim knows the truth. If he wakes her, he will be dooming her to the same lonely fate. He tries to let it go, but the thought consumes him. Eventually, he gives in. Quietly, he overrides the system and wakes her. Then he hides, watching from a distance as Aurora goes through the same confusing awakening process he once did. Later, Jim finds her at the concourse, just as dazed as he was a year ago. He introduces himself, tells her they are the only two awake, and leads her to the observatory. There, he explains that he cannot access the crew or ship's main systems. She panics and rushes to her pod, desperate to return to hibernation.
We just have to get back in our pods and start them up again.
But Jim reveals there is no way back. Once out, there is no going back in. Aurora is devastated. Back at the concourse, Jim encourages her to rest and recover from the shock. She sympathizes with his loneliness, learning he spent over a year alone. Meanwhile, Jim returns to the bar and begs Arthur to keep his secret. He does not want Aurora to know he is the one who woke her. The next morning, Aurora revisits the concourse and questions the automated system about the pods. The interface glitches, signaling deeper issues. Jim meets her there, and they grab breakfast. Aurora notices Jim's usual meal and surprises him with a gold-class dish. As they eat, they talk about fixing the pods. Unlike Jim, Aurora is determined not to give up. She searches the infirmary, digs through research files, and eventually tries to break into the crew's hibernation bay. Meanwhile, Jim begins noticing more frequent malfunctions spreading across the ship. As weeks pass, Aurora begins to accept the reality of her new life aboard the Avalon. She spends her days writing, jogging through empty corridors, and swimming laps in silence. Eventually, she decides to interview Jim, curious about the man she is stuck with. She asks why he left Earth. Jim starts with the company's sales pitch, but then opens up. He wanted to become someone new, to build a life from scratch on a planet where no one knew his name. Later, in the observatory, Aurora reveals her own dream. She had a return ticket. The plan was to live on Homestead 2 for a year, then return to Earth with the most unique story ever written. She aimed to be the first journalist to make the trip both ways. But now all of that is gone. Losing hope, Aurora becomes withdrawn, but Jim tries to lift her spirits. He takes her dancing, then to the theater, and later to shoot hoops on the basketball court. Finally, he brings her to the bar to meet Arthur. For a moment, she smiles. But the moment fades, and the weight of their situation returns. Jim stays behind, quietly drowning in guilt. Later, he is seen building something. Aurora enters the observatory and finds a handcrafted model of the Chrysler Building, a gift from Jim. Time passes and they grow closer. One night, they share dinner at the bar and exchange stories. Aurora tells him about losing her father when she was a teenager. Afterward, Jim takes her to the airlock. They suit up and step into space. For the first time, Jim is not alone out there. He disables the magnets on their boots, and they float together in the quiet beauty of space. When they return, they kiss and later spend the night together. Soon, they live like a real couple. Aurora moves into his cabin, keeps writing, and they spend every day side by side. Jim explores deeper into the ship and discovers the hydroponics bay. He surprises her with flowers. Then, on her birthday, the ship passes a red giant star. They watch it from the observatory, and that evening Jim takes her to dinner at one of the ship's restaurants, followed by drinks at the bar. While Aurora chats with Arthur, Jim heads to the washroom to prepare a ring he made for her. But in his absence, Arthur casually reveals that Jim was the one who woke her up.
He spent months deciding whether to wake you up.
When Jim returns, she is already shaking with rage. She confronts him, then storms out. Back at his cabin, Jim finds her things gone. The next day at the cantina, he tries to approach her, but she bolts before he can say a word. Aurora becomes consumed with anger. One night, she bursts into Jim's cabin and attacks him, fists flying. She wants to hurt him the way he hurt her. With nowhere else to turn, Jim speaks to her through the ship's intercom. He tries to explain, confessing that he fell in love with her, but Aurora will not listen. As far as she is concerned, he stole her life and no apology will fix that. One night, while Jim is alone in his cabin, another system failure strikes. A major malfunction causes the ship-wide commands to shut down. Later, the elevator jams while he is inside. Meanwhile, Aurora steps into the concourse and notices a tree has been planted in the middle of the room. She then heads to the cantina, only to find the food dispensers are breaking down as well. Suddenly, a voice comes over the ship's comms. It is the deck chief, Gus Mancuso, asking who planted the tree. Aurora and Jim rush to the concourse and find Mancuso standing next to it, wide awake. They introduce themselves and explain the situation. Mancuso is stunned. 3 hibernation pods failing at random does not make sense. He takes them to the bridge and manually checks the ship's systems. Something is clearly wrong. As they step outside, a robot nearly crashes down from the ceiling. Jim and Aurora explain that malfunctions like this have been happening all over the ship. Mancuso says that should not happen and then shows them how to begin gathering diagnostics. Later, Mancuso inspects the pods with Jim by his side. Jim confesses what he did to Aurora's pod. Mancuso is disturbed by the truth, but does not say more. Back at the bridge, Mancuso reviews the collected data. Aurora walks in, and they talk about her pod, but he admits he cannot undo what has been done. Then Jim arrives carrying a 16th broken robot. Mancuso, clearly unwell, decides to rest. As he walks away, he coughs up blood. That night, Aurora tries to clear her head with a swim, but the ship suddenly loses gravity. The water rises with her, pulling her up in a deadly swirl. Just in time, the gravity resets, and she survives. She finds Jim, and they rush to check on Mancuso. All three regroup at the bridge to piece together the mystery. Mancuso uncovers a critical failure from 2 years ago that knocked out a major system. Now the entire ship is overloaded, running on backup systems. If they do not find and fix the source soon, the vessel will shut down completely. They set off to locate the failure, but Mancuso collapses. Jim and Aurora rush him to the infirmary, but it is too late. His condition is terminal and nothing on board can save him. Later, they meet again at the observatory. Mancuso gives Jim his ID bracelet and tells them to fix the ship. Unfortunately, moments later, he dies. Suddenly, the ship's lights flash red and tremors shake the hull. Jim turns to Aurora. He needs her help. They sprint toward engineering. Just as they arrive, the gravity drive fails again, and then Arthur begins to glitch. Jim has no choice. He shuts Arthur down. Jim and Aurora reach engineering and trace the critical failure to the ship's power plant. When they open the hatch, a breach in the hull suddenly pulls Aurora inside. The asteroid strike has torn open that section. Jim tries to hold on, but the hatch begins to close on him, and he is pulled in as well. Together, they manage to seal the breach just in time, but Jim quickly realizes there is more than one hole in the hull. They follow the meteor's path and discover it has destroyed the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can replace the damaged parts. They find what they need and swap the components, but the reactor's automated venting sequence fails. They attempt to do it manually, but it fails again. Jim understands the only way to open the vent is from outside the ship. They suit up at the airlock. Before he heads out, Jim hands Aurora Mancuso's ID bracelet and tells her he may not come back. She helps him prepare, then tells him to return because she cannot face life on the ship without him. Aurora goes back to the reactor as the temperature soars. A sudden burst of energy drives a bolt into her arm. Outside, Jim reaches the vent. As the heat builds, he struggles to override the system. Realizing there is no other choice, Jim tells Aurora he has to hold the door open manually to let the reactor cool. She protests, begging him not to go through with it, but Jim insists. He reminds her that thousands of lives depend on it. She initiates the vent. The pressure release works, but the blast throws Jim away. His tether breaks, and the suit's pressure begins to drop. He radios Aurora, explaining what happened. She rushes to grab another suit and launches out to rescue him. Her tether comes up short and pulls her back, but she manages to catch his loose tether and pull him in. Aurora drags Jim to the infirmary and sees that he has no pulse. Desperate, she uses Mancuso's bracelet to override the system and activate emergency resuscitation. The pod begins its work. After tense moments, it revives him. Jim opens his eyes, and Aurora forgives him. Later, she repairs Arthur, and together they hold a quiet space burial for Mancuso. Jim brings her back to the infirmary and shows her something new. He has modified the medical pod to work as a hibernation chamber. He urges her to use it, so she can finish the journey asleep and safe, but she chooses to stay awake with him. Years pass. Jim proposes, and they spend their lives together on the ship. 88 years later, the Avalon finally reaches Homestead 2. The crew awakens to a stunning sight. The ship has transformed. A garden has replaced the empty concourse. Trees grow where there was once silence. Aurora's voice plays over the intercom, sharing their story, how two passengers found each other, lived a full life, and turned a cold vessel into a home. The end. So the moral of the story is, never trust a lonely dude with access to your sleep pod.